I'm Andrea Lips. I'm an assistant curator of contemporary design at Cooper-Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. And at the end of September of last year, we opened an exhibition called Joris Laarman Lab, Designed in the Digital Age. It was a traveling exhibition that came from the Groninger Museum in the Netherlands, organized by Mark Wilson. And Joris very much is known for pieces like this. This is very much his iconic bone chair. So he's known for his furniture design and whatnot. But what I really wanted to do today was to recast a lot of his work and to actually look and dig down much deeper into the ways in which he himself is actually subverting and breaking rules now in the digital age. And he actually did this at the outset of his career. So he graduated from the Design Academy of Eindhoven in the Netherlands in 2003 with the Heatwave radiator. So it's this very Rococo-inspired form. You see exuberant curls and acanthus leaf detailing. And he had created this at the time he was studying under Gijs Bakker, who of course had founded Truck Design. And with Truck Design, they very much were about rethinking everyday objects. Joris certainly wanted to do this, but he wanted to do more than just rethink the very banal radiator. He really wanted to actually engage with a dialogue with modernism, because of course modernism very much is about this correlation between functionality and streamlined form. And here, Joris really wanted to push that aside and to look at how ornament itself could potentially be functional. And so with a radiator, for instance, the more surface area that you have, the more able it is to disperse heat, so the more functional it becomes. And so in this particular case, you have much more area where you can have these, twists and turns and curls in and on itself. So ultimately, that form becomes more functional. And so here he very much is disputing and subverting that idea of modernism and that correlation between functionality and streamlined forms, and really looking at how ornamentation and high decoration itself is functional. And so I bring this up because this very much then led into what became really his most well-known project, which was the bone furniture. And it all started from this point of him really investigating and looking at reinventing ornament. So his next work actually came from a very unlikely source, and it was a documentary that he saw on TV in 2004 of this very eccentric German scientist named Klaus Methek. And Klaus kind of toiled away in his basement. He studied trees and bones, looking at the growth patterns that occurred in nature. And what he was discovering, of course, is the process is called soft kill optimization. And so the more strength that something needs, the less the more mass it will create. So Klaus was developing this into a computer algorithm that had been used by the auto industry. So all in this documentary, Joris is seeing this, and he saw this engine mount, which you see here on the right side, which starts out. This is an industrial manufactured engine mount. But then all of a sudden it is. But what you ultimately ended up seeing was that engine mount then, as the computer algorithm was applied to it, which then applied these natural growth principles based upon bone and tree growth, what you saw was an industrially manufactured engine mount, which started out, very kind of, geometrically formed and whatnot, became very elegant. And he was really taken by this idea that this very elegant, almost ornamental form could in ways be actually much more functional using less material. So he thought about this and decided to apply it to the design of a chair. So he was able to get his hands on the algorithm and did some tweaks to it with some software engineers that he employed in his lab, and put the parameters of the chair into that algorithm. Those parameters being, he decided he wanted it to be a low lounge chair, so he needed a back, it needed a seat, thinking about the material performance that he wanted to reproduce this in, the weight that he wanted this to hold, and then ultimately hit go on the computer. And this was back in 2004. And so in many ways, here he is allowing then the computer to give form to this chair. So, really it's AI becoming a form giver. And what's interesting then, This is the chair. Once it came out of the mold, it was a single mold cast aluminum chair. This is the hero shot once it's been polished. But you see this chair, which looks ornamental. It has these very attenuated form. It looks organic. But ultimately, all of that decoration is inherently functional. And this is the most optimal form for this chair out of aluminum that could be created. So this, ultimately, if nature was to create a chair, according to these parameters, this is what it would do. So Joris, with this particular project, got incredibly interested in ideas around digital technologies, digital fabrication, and really pushing at the edges of what was possible. One of the other examples I wanted to talk with you about then was actually from 2014. So this is 8 years after his creation of the bone chair. So this is the Maker Chair series. And so with this particular series, at this point, Joris had been really looking at working with computer algorithms as form givers. Then he began looking into 3D printing technologies and seeing what was possible there. So with 3D printing technologies, he was really interested in looking at consumer grade 3D printers. And often those are quite small. You have a very limited printer bed. So he decided to play around with the limitations that existed within those fabrication processes and develop a series of chairs looking at the aesthetics. And so here you see 5 chairs out of a set of 12 different chairs. He was exploring different materials, different patterns, and different fabrication processes. And so each of these chairs, whether you can tell here, for instance, like the puzzle piece chair, were created out of individual pieces that then were 3D printed, CNC milled, or whatnot, and then assembled together like a 3D puzzle. And as I was mentioning, that printer bed, again, was that limitation of it. And here you actually see a puzzle piece that's being printed in ABS plastic from a 3D printer that then went on to create this chair, which is the puzzle print chair. So this particular set of chairs ultimately was sold through a gallery, were largely inaccessible, but inherently that is not Joris's goal. He does not seek to be just a collectible designer. He ultimately thinks about a lot of these technologies as getting out there into the world and thinking about how people are using them. And even with the name inherent in the series, the Maker Chair series, he very much wanted to engage with maker communities and thinking more about how people are taking these technologies and using them. And so he ultimately took the design of this chair, adapted it so that you no longer needed 200 plus pieces, but you only needed 80 pieces. And then he put this design online for free. So open sourced it. So anyone could go on to this particular website, bitsandparts.org. You can still, to this day, you can download the chair, you can tweak it, you can iterate it, you can do whatever you want to with it. And so, anyone then can print these off, have your neighborhood 3D printer print them off, and anyone can then assemble them. Here's a kid's chair version and then the adult chair version. And what's interesting within all of this is that he very much is subverting that idea of the designer as author then. Because then all of a sudden, if he is putting out these designs into the world that anyone can really do anything with, then what does that say about his role as the designer, and what is the designer really becoming in that particular space? So then the last project that I wanted just to briefly talk about today stemmed out of a lot of the work he was doing with 3D printing. And this had really been developing for him, over the course of so many years, and the frustrations of the limitations of 3D printing. As I mentioned, the size of that printer bed, that ultimately, he wanted to design this furniture, and wouldn't it be great if it could just come out of the printer? But that's just not the way that it worked. And so this has been going on for many different designers, this frustration. And oftentimes different designers will even take it into their own hands to build larger 3D printers. Well, in this case, Joris, and actually this does have volume, so I don't know if there's a way to... I guess it's not terrible volume. So ultimately then, what this led Joris and his team to do was to completely blow apart the box of the 3D printer. And they ended up applying an extrusion arm to a robot and to 3D print metal structures in midair. And so here you just see a video of some of their initial experiments. I mean, they were just completely mind blown from all this. So they just start printing in compound curves. You'll see at one point they're printing straight off of a wall. Just really thinking about, and here you see them printing off the wall. Just really kind of pushing the boundaries and thinking about what potentially could be possible outside of the traditional limitations of 3D printing. And here again, off the wall. And so then within this space, they really began developing this. Here you see they're, testing out printing different lattice-like structures out of stainless steel. This is a shot from their lab. And ultimately, they ended up creating a company around this called MX3D, which now exists in the Netherlands. It's based in Amsterdam. And they're creating pieces like this bench. So this is a bench that is entirely 3D printed in midair, made from stainless steel with these swooping forms, this complete open lattice, self-supporting structure. And they are 3D printing a pedestrian footbridge in Amsterdam. This is actually a rendering. It is not being printed in situ like this. It's a really good rendering, because I've had so many people ask me about this. They are 3D printing the bridge in their studio because they could not get the permits from Amsterdam to actually build it on site, although that was initially the idea. But they are 3D printing this, and it's going to be installed this year, actually, this summer. So what's really interesting about all this is, I find with people like Joris, who very much are really pushing us forward and are constantly pushing against the boundaries and the rules that preside over us, and even the technologies and the fabrication limitations, a lot of this ends up leading us more towards innovation and pointing us more towards the future. And so in many ways, a lot of these people could end up becoming the rule makers as we look back on this in 50 years. So with that, thank you very much.